One. So welcome back, everybody. Today we've got our final sessions. We're going to start off with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, followed by Susan Button chairing the Portable Planetariums Committee, and then finally Pedro Raposo for the History of the Planetarium Working Group. So let's get started right away. For our EDI presentation, chairs Dana Thompson and Danny LeBlanc. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. And yes, you know me very well. I am freaking out a little bit, but freaking out in a good way because we have a lot planned during our session. And I want to make sure that we fit it all in. So I'm Dana Thompson, the director of the Brown Planetarium at Ball State University in the United States. And I'm also co-chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee alongside Danny LeBlanc here.
Hi, and I'm Danny LeBlanc, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am the director of immersive theaters and programs at the Museum of Science in Boston in USA, and also the co-chair of the EDI committee.
All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. And if you didn't notice on my name here in Zoom, I do have the pronouns she and they, so either is acceptable. All right, we're going to start back how I presented a couple of days back about just sharing the website here, because under the website, we have a lot of information about the committees. Under our Get Involved tab here, we have our list of committees, and you can see them, learn more about them. And I'm showing this because even though we're co-chairs of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee here, we work alongside all of these other committees in all that we do. And we use folks from other committees for our work. For example, the International Relations Committee, we have used to translate the recent culture and climate survey to really get an international response to that. And you're going to be hearing about that soon from Shannon Schmoll. But if we go up to our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee page, it has all of the information about our committee. But of course, there's more. We're going to share with you a little bit more than what's here on this page. But you can get an idea of our function. Basically, we're here to make sure that the IPS fully benefits from the talents of all of our members. But then beyond that, we want to make sure that the practices that we're doing at our individual institutions or in our individual work really are as welcoming and accessible as possible. We have some documents here. For instance, why is equity, diversity, and inclusion important in the planetarium field? And this is just a quick draft of a quick overview of why EDI, why equity, diversity, and inclusion. Why is it important to what we do, not just within the IPS, but then also at our institutions? We're going to be expanding this later, but this gives you a quick idea of our work here and why it is so important. We have presented on the committee before. You can watch presentations of that. And we also have a page dedicated to racial justice in the IPS. And when we started this committee, Danny and I, when it became a standing committee, we created this inclusive excellence plan that is focused on these 5 goals here. And we're going to be using the term inclusive excellence a little bit during our presentation. And it's just a fancy way of saying that we're committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion in everything that we do. So our goals here are around culture and climate of inclusion, inclusive policies and systems, inclusive conferences and events, recruitment and retention, and professional development. You can read a summary of all these goals here, but this whole plan is quite extensive, and Danny's going to be sharing with you what that looks like.
Cool. And if Dana, you're going to pull that up, right?
I sure can.
Thank you. So yes, so the plan, you know, and you've heard us talk about it before, the plan continues to be our guiding document and roadmap for sort of the long-term work that the EDI committee is pursuing. There's all of these different buckets that Dana just pointed out, the 5 areas that we kind of created and emphasized as particular areas, the creating the culture of belonging, policies, looking at the IPS organization policies and make sure that they're representing the values that we are committed to, making sure that our events for goal 3, the inclusive, that our events and conferences are also reflecting these values, making sure that we're recruiting and retaining the organizational membership that we have so that we have a healthy membership for the future, and then also creating the professional development. So all of these can dive deep into many bullets, and you can see if we scroll down, we can look at some of the objectives that we have, the specific, and then the specific sort of key points beneath each of those that will help us meet those objectives. Clearly there's a lot here, and it is meant to be a living document that changes, and also that we emphasize different parts of it based on the need in the moment. So the work that we did last year, which I'll talk about some of the highlights, particularly the culture and climate survey that you will hear more about extensively in a moment, we're meant to unlock some of the other areas and like identify some of the other places that need focus on right now, or just areas that will develop opportunity or help us develop places where we can grow and improve. And that's something that we will be reflecting on together as a group later on in our session. So we have all of these different areas, you know, this plan, the entire EDI committee, we have about 25 members. We're all kind of focused on this. In the past, we've created sub-teams that can help kind of divide and conquer so that we can get more done with the group that we have and use people's expertises and experiences in different areas. So we can talk a little bit about the highlights of the things that we've done. We'll jump over to that. From last year, starting really from around this time last year when we presented at the vCon, we had just finished, or were just on the verge of finishing, the code of conduct, revising and getting it approved by the board. So you can read that code of conduct. It is available on the website. And know that it has already gone through a revision. So that also, you know, that is our basis of work, and but always wanting to be reflective of the moment and the needs of the organization. We created for the vCon, and then added it to the website as well, an inclusive event guide, and then also guidelines for presenting at conferences that were just meant to keep in mind inclusivity and accessibility on the presenter side. So that's there as a reference that people can use. That was with the help of Ryan Wyatt, who helped us put that together. You may remember, if you were at last year's vCon, some of the sessions that we had. We had an incredible anti-racist session that we had put together with some speakers, just again, highlighting what we can do as an industry, where we are as an industry, and some of the areas that we are strong and some of the areas where we could improve. We also presented, again, just, you know, showing membership and demonstrating to membership the things that the committee is working on and doing, which we think is important to communicate, and then solicit feedback from people so that we can hear what is important and what is relevant to everyone, no matter where you are in the world. What are the relevant issues that the EDI committee can be aware of, and work to support you in that work. The another thing that was a big accomplishment for us this year was that we finalized and actually put into use what we call the Conference Site Assessment Toolkit. And this was meant to be a tool, also very extensive, but it's meant to be a tool, not a grade, but a tool that the board members could use to support conversations about where the IPS site should be when they're making those decisions. So there's all kinds of categories here: general considerations, you know, the planetarium, the facilities, accommodating large numbers, and there's particular ones that are specific to equity, diversity, and inclusion, accessibility of the sites, you know, how much of this has been considered in the bid. And this document is transparent to IPS bidders so that they can see this. It's not meant to be a secret. It's meant to be out there as a tool for bidders to plan with and use, and just kind of understand the things that the board members and the organization would need for a successful conference that reflects our values. And so the EDI does one of these for each of the bids. So we did review the bids. We gave our considerations and our thoughts, and then we presented that to the board, who then took, you know, that information and considered it into the final decisions. So that is something that we felt was important to have as just a measure, and something that gives us some concrete, a tool that helps us with those discussions.
How about 30 seconds, Danny?
All right, 30 seconds, great. The climate survey is a big one. You're going to hear all about that in a moment. And then there were some other things that we did, testimonials, working with the other committees like Dana had just mentioned, and just thinking about the future and thinking about our next steps. But because the climate survey is such a big one, we had a subgroup that focused in on that and getting that together. I will turn it over to Shannon now, who can tell us more about the results.
Yeah, so just before that, we do have an extensive committee list, and Shannon is one of them who took charge of the subgroup responsible for the climate and culture and climate survey. Also, if you at any time have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat, and then you can also send them privately to myself or Danny, and we can help get them to the presenters here. We're gonna be hearing from multiple people, not just Danny and myself during the session.
All right, so hello everyone. I will hit present. I'm Shannon Schmoll. If you were here Wednesday, you also saw me over at the Education Committee. But I am going to share some of the preliminary results that we have from the Culture and Climate Survey that we did. So as Dana and Danny was going through, there are several goals of the EDI committee, and the first one is to create a culture and climate of inclusion where everyone can feel a sense of belonging. And sort of the first step in doing that is establishing a baseline for where we are and where we have work to do. And so we created a survey that was distributed to planetarians around the world, regardless of IPS membership status. The reason being, if people are not participating in IPS, we should know why. Are there reasons why people aren't participating? We also did translate it. We ended up getting it translated into 8 languages in the end, and there were 361 responses, but 250 of them were actually completed. And what I mean by that is no question was ever required on this. So there was 250 that actually got past the first question of, are you willing to participate? Or somebody like opened it up at work and then went home and did it, and then that counted as 2 and only one of them was complete. So that's why there's that difference there. And ultimately what I want to share today is just the results of what came out of this. I'm not going to try to offer any interpretation for why this is. I'm not going to try to do any in-depth analysis, but this will be used by the EDI committee and the board for figuring out future directions for IPS. Also, one of the things that as we go through this, I want to caution against is to look for where the gaps are, to look for where there is the room for improvement. If something seems like a very positive result, that's great, but also look at what the whole result is, and also consider who's actually represented within this data right now. And that could also be affecting some of the things that we see. So speaking of who is represented, these are the demographics of the respondents, of the folks who did respond to the survey. So starting with race and ethnicity, you can see that we are overwhelmingly white, and no other group is represented beyond about 10%, not even that. And so we are very overwhelmingly white within our organization. And also just to note, everything is also on percentages throughout this, just so that we have a consistent way of talking about what we're seeing here. Also, whenever possible, people were allowed to choose more than one option throughout the survey, unless it was a question where it did not make sense, like a yes, no, maybe question. All right. The age of our respondents is, we had it split up into several different, what's the word? Subgroups here, I guess. And so overall, the age that was least represented were younger folks, so 25 to 34. We have no one under 25 that responded to the survey. And the largest group represented is 55 to 69. And so you can see how that's split up. About 1/3 of the respondents are in that group of 55 to 69 years old. And related, but not exactly the same, is years in the field. So the average years in the field, we ask people to just put in a number for how long they have been in the planetarium field. If someone put something like 5+ years, I counted that as 6, just for full transparency here, because I can't really know what plus meant in that case. So, so this isn't precise, but it is a fairly accurate representation. So the average is 22.3 with a median of 20 years. But if we sort of split that up into sort of roughly 5-year chunks or so, we see that we mostly have people who have been in the field for 5 to 10 years, so fairly early on in their career, and people who've been in the field for 30 plus years. So we sort of have this bifurcation, if you will, in terms of the folks that we have in our field and the length of time. Looking at gender, you can see that we are of the respondents, majority were men, and just about 30% were women, and majority were people who are cisgender. And sexual orientation, majority are people who are heterosexual. So what I think we can maybe summarize from a lot of this is that the people who are most represented within this data set and within our field are people who have not historically been excluded from science fields. And so that is being reflected within our data. So when it comes, so this is something we might want to think about when it comes to representation within our field, and again, what work we can do. We also are an international organization, and so we did ask people what IPS zone they are from, and a majority are North America, followed by Europe. So over 50% of the respondents were from North America, about 25% were from Europe, and then the remainder was split among the rest of the zones. So while we are an international organization, we do definitely have a lean towards North America. So also I'm going to just ignore the chat for now because I think that will distract me, but Dana and Danny are on it. So if there's something in particular that needs to be addressed now, we will do that. We might not have time for questions right now, but I can also try to answer those in the chat later, just as an FYI, because there's a lot to get through and I'm not including even everything, but there will be a full report that will have everything made available as soon as it is done. So. We also asked about religion. So we see about 25% are atheist, 25% are religious, and 25% are non-religious. And then the other 25% is mostly spiritual or other often being a certain philosophy that someone subscribes to. So not necessarily a religion, but a philosophy or way of thought. And then we also asked what religion people belonged to. And so we use that to then build these categories that we see here. So most people who do belong to a religion, it is a Christian religion of some denomination. And then you can see the other split. And again, that other is going to be folks who follow a certain philosophy. We also see that there are many different disabilities that are represented here. So this is something to take into account when, say, planning conferences, like with the conference planning document that was brought up before. But this gives you a sense of where we need to make sure that we are providing accommodations and things like that. There's also, I think, a couple of these pie slices. I realized that the label did not make it in this particular way, making the graph. So again, that'll be in the full report. I also recognize I have a lot of typos in here, so I apologize and I will fix those. We also asked which languages people spoke, and so we asked that people just list out the languages separated by commas. And so that was used to then break it up that we see here. So we have about half people who only speak English, a little less than half who speak multiple languages, including English, and then another 3.5% or so of folks who do not speak any English, be it multilingual or monolingual here. And so we are an English organization in terms of our official language of operation. And so that could be why something that we might see here. So this is something to also think about. We are international as well. So what does that mean for our organization? But this is the split of all the languages that were listed. So you can see that here. Sorry, it's a little blurry there. So again, time. Okay. So one of the goals of this survey was to also establish what the potential barriers would be for attending conferences. So conferences are a primary way that you can participate with IPS, but not the only. So what are some of the barriers that will prevent people from attending conferences? We also wanted to know how often people are even able to attend in the first place. So if we take the whole set of data, we see that most represented to about a third of folks, a little more than third, have attended between 1 and 3 conferences. Another quarter have attended none. And then the remaining third or so are folks who have attended 4 or more, with a smaller chunk who have been to 9 or more, which it's a lot of conferences. That's great. But this is the number of conferences attended. But how does this maybe break up with different groups of people? And so we look at men versus women, for instance. Women are more likely to attend fewer conferences than men. And similarly, we see this with people of color are also more likely to attend fewer conferences, and people with disabilities are also attending fewer conferences overall. So, and if there's something like I need to go slower, let me know. I'm trying to make sure we get through everything, but also trying to give some people time. There's a lot to digest here. So what are the barriers to attending? What is stopping people from attending more conferences? By far, the most common answer was travel fees are too expensive, followed pretty evenly between conference fees are too expensive and employers not supporting someone leaving. There's also professional and personal obligations. People do not feel comfortable communicating in English, and English is again the language that IPS uses. And so we see that its cost is primarily the main barrier, but it's not the only one. We also asked if people thought that equity, diversity, and inclusion should be a focus of the IPS. And on the whole, about 3/4 of the respondents said yes, another 16% said maybe, and just under 8% said no. But how does this look again when we look at different groups?
Look at this horrifying.
Okay, so when we split this up by generation or by age, what we see is that younger folks, younger than 45, are far more likely to say that it should be a focus of IPS, and people who are older are less than 50% likely to say yes. And so we do see differences in generation. We also see differences between, if we compare everyone to people who are LGBTQIA+, very overwhelming majority here think that this, of people who are LGBTQIA+, think we should be focusing on this. And same with women. Women are more likely to say yes as well, and less likely to say no. The maybe is sort of in there. So, so most of that came from the no that went into yes, if you compare to everyone, if that makes any sense. So again, we're seeing that people who have been historically excluded from STEM are also more likely to say yes in this case. So this gets into some of the meat, I think, the very information dense section that is not easily represented by pie charts anymore. And so we did ask what people thought in terms of IPS itself and sort of the characteristics of IPS or their experience with IPS. And so this was a Likert scale. So we had 6 data points where people could go from strongly agree to strongly disagree. There's also options of I don't understand the question or I do not have enough information. So this is things like, is IPS ableist? Is IPS anti-racist? And so on. So we'll go through those. They are in alphabetical order, which is the way that they were on the survey as well. And the way, rather than doing a histogram, which is how I would normally represent this, we split this up into several different subgroups. So there's everyone, so that's the whole data set. And then we have different groups that's roughly generational. So like being very rough here, but the millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, and boomers, just kind of, again, very rough, it's not exact. And then we have LGBTQIA+ folks, women, people of color, and people with disabilities. And so again, rather than doing histograms, this is sort of a dot to kind of show what's going on, and I'll show you. And the reason why I plotted it this way, this was the way that made the most sense to me when trying to understand what's going on. Because if everyone, for the most part, agreed, you would see pretty smooth lines that followed a very similar trend. And so when different groups or subgroups do not agree with the statement of what's going on, you will see a lot more, I keep saying it's discordant. So I think you see a lot more differences, and you also see where things maybe like pop out pretty big, where there's a difference of opinion compared to the full set of data. So for instance, is IPS ableist? You can see here that younger respondents were more likely to somewhat agree compared to everyone else by quite a bit. And though they were of that group more likely to strongly disagree, it is not the same strength compared to other subgroups here. So you can see that there is disagreement here, and there's younger folks are more likely to disagree with this disagree to this statement to a lesser extent. So we can see that there's not full agreement here in this particular case. Again, generally positive with the trend towards being strongly disagree, but there's still non-zero answers to this, and especially around agree and somewhat agree and strongly agree. So that's something to consider. So don't just take the biggest result and be like, okay, we're fine. There's still room for growth. There's room for improvement. So consider that as we go through this. Is IPS anti-racist? Here we see a more similar trend line across the different groups, where most people, where pretty much all the different groups, the peak is at agree that IPS is anti-racist, though for younger respondents, the trend is flatter here. So again, that there's less of a strong sentiment here with the younger. Okay. So I've got to move all my pictures around.
Shannon?
Yes.
I'm trying to keep up in the chat, but I'm not going as fast as you are. Can you define some of these terms, please?
Yes. So ableist would be discrimination against people who have a disability. So, or a preference towards somebody who does not have a disability in terms of policies. And if Danny and Dana, feel free to chime in if this is not accurate. So anti-racist would be active policies and work to dismantle racism. All right. And so ageist, so this would be discrimination based on age. So here we have, and we did define these where needed within the survey, just so everyone knows. It's really hard for me to see my plot and like the window here, so. Okay, so here we have ageist. You can see that again, the youngest respondents were disagreed a little bit more in terms of the general plot line, in that they were far less likely to disagree than everyone else. But we also see a flatter line here with LGBTQIA+ folks here saying more likely to disagree or somewhat disagree than to strongly disagree compared to everyone. Also more likely to strongly agree that IPS is ageist. Discriminatory, so this is a more general discrimination within the policies and IPS as a community. And so here we can see that Again, overall, the trend is toward disagree, but we do see some differences. So people of color are the most likely to strongly agree that IPS is discriminatory, and rather significantly. So these are things to also keep in mind. We also see a flatter curve overall with the younger folks as well. So is IPS diverse? And again, this is a more general term in terms of diversity. And we can see some differences. So the trend is toward agreeing, though people of color were the most likely to agree and the least likely to strongly agree. So while there is agreement, it's to a lesser extent. And younger folks were also fairly likely to disagree compared to everyone, but also less likely to agree and then strongly agree more. So it's a much more bouncy plot, is lack of a better term there. So we do see some differences. So that's why, and again, we're going to have a full report because there's a lot that needs to be taken in, and we can't just look at some of this stuff and be like, all right, that's what it is. There's a lot to unpack here. So this is just trying to introduce some of this. And how am I doing on time? I think I've got 10 more minutes, right?
Yep,
Okay.
10 minutes.
Is the IPS homophobic? So here we see general agreement. Sorry, give me a second. So we see general agreement, though we do see that people who are LGBTQIA+ are more likely to somewhat agree or agree compared to everybody else. And so, and then also, again, younger folks were more likely to somewhat agree as well. So homophobic would be discrimination against people who are LGBT. Okay. Inclusive, we see quite a bit of agreement here compared to some of the other ones. So is IPS inclusive? And for the most part, everyone followed similar trends. There's a little bit of difference here in the disagree end, but the overall trend is pretty close across the board. Open-minded, so is IPS open-minded? So everyone is this sort of middle blue here. So more likely to agree, and then strongly agree is right below it. So we see that with 35 to 54. We also see it for 55+. But we also see a sharper decline towards strong agree with women. We see a flatter curve for people with disabilities, for LGBTQIA+, and younger folks are the most likely to somewhat disagree as well. And is IPS racist? So we see a flatter curve here with the younger folks as well, and also people of color are more likely than anyone else to strongly agree with this, that IPS is racist. Is IPS respectful? Again, we do see similar trends, and it's fairly follows a pretty similar trend. So LGBTQIA+ folks are the most likely to disagree, and people of color are the most likely to strongly disagree. And is IPS sexist? This one is, there's not a lot of agreement here. So compared to some of these other ones where you can kind of see a similar trend line across, it's not the case for sexist. We see a lot of differences. So women are most likely to somewhat agree. But we also see this one is all over the place is what I'm trying to say. So there is a lot of discord here. So we are going to be seeing, so we see that there's not a lot of agreement on whether or not IPS is sexist and to what extent. And so this is something that we're going to need to look at and unpack, I think, a lot more deeply than we maybe have time for here. Welcoming, we see sort of two rough trends, but generally trending toward agree, and then strongly agree for some folks as well. We also see that LGBTQIA folks are more likely to somewhat disagree or disagree with this. compared to everyone else. Transphobic, so this would be somewhat, this would be discrimination against people who are transgender. And here we have LGBTQIA folks would be more likely to somewhat disagree compared to everyone else. And there is some disagreement here. Also, disagree is least likely by quite a bit by younger folks. Willing to change, the youngest respondents are more likely to somewhat disagree compared to everyone. LGBTQIA folks are more likely to disagree here. So we can see this as well. We also had some statements. So this was this looks the same. We just don't have the I don't understand or I don't have enough information. So these are statements about yourself and your experience within IPS. So same subgroups here. I feel valued by other members of the IPS community. So we see that younger respondents are while tend toward agree to a lesser extent compared to everyone else. There's also a flatter curve here that we see for people of color, where agree and somewhat agree are closer in terms of the number of responses. And so that's showing a lesser extent overall. Also, LGBTQIA+ folks are the most likely to strongly disagree. I have considered leaving the planetarium field because I have felt isolated or unwelcomed by the IPS community. So we see pretty strong agreement here with most people saying strongly disagree, but again, there's non-zero answers in the somewhat agree, or strongly agree, with people of color being the most likely to strongly agree with this statement. I feel I belong in the IPS community. So we see general agreement, though the youngest respondents are more likely to somewhat disagree and agree the least amount. So while again, a trend towards agreement, lesser so. I have to work harder than others to be taken seriously in the IPS community. This is another one that's sort of a bit more all over the place in terms of experience, depending on what group we are looking at here. So LGBTQIA+ folks are more likely to somewhat agree. Women are a bit more likely to somewhat agree compared to everyone as well, as are younger folks, whereas younger folks are more likely than anyone else to somewhat disagree with this. We also see that people of color are the most likely to agree or strongly agree with the statement. And the IPS community has a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we see, again, a similar trend for most subgroups, but LGBTQIA folks are most likely to somewhat agree. So agreement is to a lesser extent, and younger folks have a much flatter curve as well. So while agree is the one that is the most represented, not by a whole lot compared to the rest. And I am treated with respect by others in the IPS community. So this is a fairly similar trend line across the board here. And I feel others in the IPS community do not value my opinions. Here we see that people of color have the flattest curve here and are the most likely to somewhat disagree, and the least likely to disagree. And so there's a flatter curve here in terms of, again, the strength of agreement. So checking time, I have like 2 minutes left. Okay, so a couple of things. We also asked, huh?
It's okay if you go over just a couple.
Okay. All right, so frequency of negative experiences. So we asked, how many times have you been discriminated against because of your ability, your weight, your height, and so on? And so you can see that here. I have this actually split over 2 slides. So while most of the time, majority for all of these would be never, there are non-zero answers for almost every single one. And so that is something to consider, that there have been discriminatory events that have happened to people involving the IPS community. When it comes, and I have sort of notes on here, so we have clothing. It was largely straight white men who have reported instances of being discriminated against due to their clothing. Gender is mostly women and non-binary folks. And language is entirely people outside of North America. And then we also have politics, that was almost entirely people from within North America. Religion, it was mostly people who identify as religious and as Christian. And sex would be mostly women here that are for these instances. We also asked, how many times have you found it difficult to participate in IPS due to your ability, accent, age, etc. And so we can see that accent, it's entirely non-North American respondents who said that it was at least sometimes, so that's for all of these. Only women or people who preferred not to say said that they found it difficult to participate because of their gender. Mostly non-North American respondents, again, for language, found it difficult. Parental status is all people who are under 55 years old, and it was more women than men, and it was all people with minor children, and sexual orientation, it was entirely LGBTQIA+ folks who have found it difficult to participate. We also asked for open-ended comments, and I'm not going to go through those right now. There were quite a few. There were some that were very long, and so we are coding those. So I have started categorizing those. So I'm coding those into different categories. We do not plan on ever releasing like the verbatim quotes from anybody, but we will categorize what the extent was or the sentiments were within that. So we are working on getting that ready to go, and that's part of the report. So the report is drafted. There are some edits that need to be made, but this is a starting point, and most of the initial results, though not quite all, for interest of time. So there we go. I'm done now.
Thank you, Shannon. Huge thank you for this. Is tremendous work. It was many, many months of planning. So thank you to you and the subcommittee, the sub-team of the group. And then I just want to thank all of you who've listened to this. And we know and recognize how hard it is to listen to some of this and to take an inward look at ourselves, but that we feel really committed that it's important to do it in order to grow and become an even more amazing organization. So there's a lot of work here. There's a lot of things to unpack. This is going to be central to how we decide what we're doing next. And we know that there's probably a lot here that you are digesting. And so what we're going to do when we come back from the break is take 10 minutes to reflect together. What we've asked Michael to do is to take the recording off so that we can do it in a safe way.
Thank you, Michael. And our first paper session is going to be about building and welcoming people, or building relationships and welcoming people into the dome. Second presentation is going to be then, once we get people into the dome, how do we have our planetarium set up in order to allow full participation for our visitors? And then one step further, once we have that in place at our institutions, how do we maintain or retain strong, lasting relationships with people coming in? So that's kind of the flow of the talks, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter, Andy here. Andy, take it away.
So thank you, Dana. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Andy Praichie. I'm based in Santa Cruz, California. I have a portable business there right now that's been on hiatus during the pandemic. So I've gotten involved in some other things. One of them is doing dark sky advocacy. That's why my slide has the IDA logo on it. But also I've been involved in this committee, and that inspired me to chair a similar committee for the Pacific Planetarium Association. So that's the IDEA committee, adding A, or accessibility, into the mix. So yeah, I just think the work that you know, Dana and Danny have started has inspired me to do better, and I'm, you know, I think it will inspire you as well, based on what we've heard today so far, even. So yeah, my talk was way too long to even put it on a slide. So community partnerships, outreach and belonging, inclusion and welcoming practices, and economic accessibility. So I'll cover that in 8 minutes, no problem. No, but yeah, so I think one of the things that impresses me with what's been done so far in just a short time is it's not just intention. I think we all have good intentions. We want to be inclusive of people, but combining this intention with actual action. So in our IDEA committee for the PPA, we had some discussions before we decided what we were going to do. And it can be overwhelming, you know, how do we make progress here? So our PPA committee has decided just to focus on one thing. Ours specifically is collaborating with Indigenous people. So we'll have a seminar on that coming up in October that I think people should be interested in attending. So those are regular PPA seminars that happen the last Friday of the month. So you can look out for that on Dome Dialogues. But to go forward here, I just wanted to put it out to you, and Dana can monitor the answers in the chat for me. What is a typical question when you're going to a big group of, like a big party or something? What's a typical question that you might go up and ask somebody? Or what's a typical question you've had asked of yourself? So any responses yet?
Not yet.
No, no, any party. No, not specific to Dome. We're gonna get there. You're a step ahead of me here.
Where are you from?
Where are you from? Right, yeah. What do you do? Exactly. So these are very typical questions. And, you know, they are specific, which can be good. But if I can share my screen here and see if I could here. Yeah, I think I can. Sorry about that. So I'm gonna try to show you a person who has some good advice about that. Here we go. All right, anybody recognize this lady? Hopefully you can see her. So, Dana, we seeing my screen?
Yeah, we're seeing your screen. No responses in the chat here.
Yeah, so, yeah, this is a lady back in the 70s when she started her career interviewing people. Very famous here in the United States. Her name's Terry Gross, and she's famous for having very insightful questions of people. And in a recent article, she was asked, well, what do you say to people at a party? And her response was 4 words long. Tell me about yourself. So yeah, we're not pigeonholing anyone by asking this question. You know, what their job is, or how old they are, or where they happen to live at the moment. It's up to them to respond. And like that idea. I consider that, I guess, inclusive. So, okay, we're at a planetarium conference. This is a photo I downloaded from the internet just a few minutes ago from the Pleiades conference in 2017. You're at a planetarium conference. What's a typical thing you might say to a person or ask of a person at a planetarium conference? Any responses?
Tell me about your dome. Which planetarium do you work at? Where are the drinks? See you at the hospitality suite. How big is your dome? Yeah.
Yeah. How big is your dome? That's a good one. You know, we can get into, you know, what's the reflectivity of your dome, but how big is your dome? So that's fairly specific, but I want you to reconsider this question in terms of inclusivity. How big is your dome? Who is coming to your dome? Who is coming to your shows? And again, I can tell you what I've done in my past career running planetariums, but I think it's more interesting because we have, you know, we've learned this morning. I'm going to stop sharing here if I can figure it out. You know, we've learned this morning a little bit more about ourselves. And again, if we consider who we want to be, how we want to act with intention and action as far as diversity is involved, as far as inclusion is involved. And, you know, I want to make it clear, I believe that these are not words, these are ideas. They're not static things on a website. These are things we can act on personally and act on professionally. So I would like to send you into your breakout rooms and ask these two questions of each other. Ask, or say, just tell me about yourself. You may know the person, but they may tell you something different about them, depending on their mood. So one thing you learn in diversity training, and I've read so many things about this, and they're very corporate, and, you know, hiring someone is not, you're not hiring someone diverse if you're hiring someone that it just happens to be a different race than you. That's not the definition of diversity. So, but it's my belief that we as individuals, you know, are diverse. You know, you may go to a planetarium conference and be thrilled that there are 50 people in the same room and you can choose from them. You may feel more introverted that day. I just took a personality test recently and I came up as 51% introvert. And yeah, I think that's accurate. So maybe it's like, oh my God, so much knowledge in the room, I don't know where to start. So hopefully these two questions and, you know, tell me about yourself and how big is your dome? And by big, I mean broad. How do you bring people in your dome that might be disadvantaged economically, that might be a large representation of your community, but you don't typically see coming to your shows, that sort of thing. So again, I could give you my experience, but I'm more interested in yours. Okay, we see make it free. And, you know, I've talked to people who have free shows in their domes and they still don't get that many people. So what works when you have free shows? That sort of thing. So we're going to put it out to you, put you in breakout rooms, ask those two questions, think about this, get inspired by your colleagues, get to know them better, and let's go from there.
All right, Andy, how many people would you like in each breakout room?
I'm sure you can figure something out, Mike. I was thinking like 5 or 6.
All right, that sounds good to me. All right, everybody will be assigned automatically and you'll be sent in just a bit. Rooms will last for 6 minutes. And let's open the rooms now.
That was fun.
Yeah, is Andy back yet?
Looks like people are slowly populating.
Okay, Andy, we're gonna wrap up here. We have to get moving on to our next paper session. Did you want to just do a conclusion on that?
Yeah, so again, I just hope you'll think more broadly about this question of how big is your dome, who is coming to it, who you can include, that sort of thing, and you know, act with some intention and let us know how you're doing. And I will add that our PPA idea committee, so we have the extra A, the extra letter, we also have a feedback form on our website. So if you're in the PPA, or even if you're not, and you want to read our statement and respond, we'd appreciate that too. And one of the things we did in our statement is kind of made a parallel to what we do as planetarians. You know, it can be intimidating to be able to teach the whole universe. That's everything. But, you know, somehow we planetarians take that on, and that's great. And so this is kind of putting that into the human realm too. So the universe of human behavior, neurodiversity, whatever, we take it all. So so thank you for your time and your attention, and keep up the good work.
All right, thanks, Andy. Next, we're gonna hear from Noreen.
Let me bring on my slides. I need to be able to share screen. Let's see. Yep. Okay, can you see the slide?
Looks good. If you want to go into present, yep, there you
Yep.
go.
Getting there, and gonna add one last thing.
Wonderful, thank you, Noreen.
Okay. Well, thank you for your attendance in this session. I'm going to speak a little about planetarium accessibility and topics you may want to consider in your dome and programming. Let's first take a brief look at a couple of statistics. From a global viewpoint, according to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, 15% of the world's population has a disability. According to the United States Census, more than 20% of the US population has a disability. So when looking at all countries, there are millions of people with disabilities. These may be people who have never attended one of your programs or cannot attend because of an accessibility barrier. Let's use these icons to take a look at ways you can create a more welcoming place for people with different needs. Since each planetarium is unique, your resources and possibilities will differ, but here are some things to think about. Is your planetarium accessible for a person who has a mobility disability? The person may have a permanent disability or temporary disability, like a broken leg, and use crutches. They may use a cane for balance or a walker or a wheelchair and need access. Would they be able to easily access your dome? Is your planetarium accessible by stairs or an elevator? And what happens if the elevator is out of order? Look at your current situation and see if you can have a plan B for physical access. Oh, skipped one. Does your dome offer a non-visual way to participate in the program? If a visually impaired person came to a show, do you have touchable materials available? These might include tactile pictures of the kinds of images shown on the dome for that program, or a 3D model, or even a toy model. Do you have descriptive narration for your pre-recorded program? Descriptive narration is a separate narration track that pictorially describes the scene. It is inserted in the natural pauses of the presentation and heard through a headset during the program. If you are purchasing a show, ask the vendor if descriptive narration is available. If you are producing the show, consider adding it as an option. Some people avoid visiting museums and planetariums because they can be overstimulated by changes in volume, images, and light. Many museums are now offering autism-friendly shows where the show volume is low, the lights are on part way, and there is no judgment for visitors who need to come and go and make vocal sounds or physical movements. You may want to consider this option for your facility. A person using an electric display to verbally speak for them is using alternative and augmentative communication. A touch screen or a pointing device like the type Stephen Hawking used may activate the device. How can you make your dome or programs accessible for a person who is hearing impaired or deaf? Consider these 3 strategies. In conferences, you may see a live transcriber typing captions for hearing impaired participants. Since this may not be feasible for planetariums, you may want to consider offering either prepared captions if they come with a show kit, or that you program or use artificial intelligence system to display live captions. I am using Google's live captioning system during this presentation. Google also offers a free app called Google Live Transcribe for Android devices. So if you offer Wi-Fi, a visitor who has an Android phone or tablet can download Google Live Transcribe and display captions on their device. Or you may offer a device for visitors to use. Assistive listening is an option for visitors who can hear but need volume amplification. The visitor may bring their own device or borrow one of your units with a headset to adjust the volume for their best level. If the visitor has a hearing aid or cochlear implant, they may need a telecoil loop instead of a headset to work with their device. Visitors who are deaf use sign language as their primary means of communication. They may bring a sign language interpreter or request that you provide one. You may need to clarify what resources you are able to provide. For example, can you provide lighting for an interpreter or have the ability to schedule and provide an interpreter for a program? 2 devices we just talked about can also be used in a different way for people who do not have difficulty hearing. This is the group that does not natively speak the language of your programming. For example, this group might be those who speak your country's primary language as their secondary language. In this case, captioning is often requested. For example, some visitors have expressed that reading English is easier for them to understand than listening. If you purchase a show kit that has multi-language tracks and you have a multi-channel assistive listening system, you can assign different languages to different tracks. Then lend out an assistive listening unit and set it to the needed channel. A related item to consider, if doing this, have signage that tells visitors this resource is available and identify that information in that language. For example, do not have signage in English only that states that you have translations available in other languages, because the person who needs that language might not be able to read the English text. List each resource in that language. Anticipate service and emotional support animals. Service animals are trained in specific tasks. For example, you may be familiar with guide dogs for the blind. There are also guide ponies for the blind. And there are also dogs who can pull wheelchairs, assist their person with balance while standing or walking, open doors, place an ATM card in a slot, notify a deaf person of an alarm, and alert that person of an upcoming medical problem. Dogs may also be trained as psychiatric service animals and take a specific action for their person. All service animals should be trained, well-behaved, and under the control of their handler. Emotional support and therapy animals serve as companions. Unlike service animals, support animals are not trained to do specific tasks and do not qualify as service animals under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So these are some things to consider in making your planetarium facility and programming more accessible and welcoming. Proactively, we can make the universe more accessible together. Thank you. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you
So I
much,
want,
Lorraine. Go ahead. Did you want to do an activity?
yes, that's actually what I was just about to do. I wanted to ask people, just sort of as kind of a roundtable here, do you have any personal experiences interacting with visitors who have disabilities? And if so, what did you do, or what do you think you would do in the future? And let's see, since I haven't been looking at the chat at all, I've been talking. Let's see.
There's the one question from Ryan. Any tips for portable domes that may not be able to carry extra materials or many extra materials?
Yeah, so as far as, well, one of the great things about the Google Live Transcribe app is that can be somebody's cell phone or that can be a tablet. And so if you're giving a live program, you know, that person can have it on their device, or you lend the device and then they can see the captions going. So I think that's a great alternative for making your program more accessible to people who have hearing impairment. And then as far as tactually, if you could, you know, have some items. I mean, I wrote a book called Touch the Stars that does have tactile images of different objects in it. That, you know, among other resources, could be something that you want to bring with you.
I would highly recommend Noreen's book, and if you can see, I've
Got it.
holding up to the screen, live transcribe running right there. And a suggestion, you could get cheap tablets, maybe attach a couple to the backs of some chairs, and then just turn them on when you think that you have need of them. And it's amazing because it's free, and you don't have to invest in anything fancy or complicated, and remarkably accurate too.
But it does not work with an iPhone, so it's Android only, and that's important.
Unfortunately, and I happen to be also a Mac person too, but it does. There isn't yet a free alternative on the iPhone. There is a paid one, but you have to sign up for a bunch of stuff. So far, that's the way it goes.
I have a comment about all of this. We've had groups of deaf people come in with a sign language interpreter, and I find it very, very important to stay quiet while they are observing the stars, because they're using the same sensory for watching the stars and watching the interpreter. So, you know, I will stay quiet, point out a constellation, and then I talk as they watch the interpreter see, you know, check out what I'm saying. I also had a question. You talk about support animals and service animals. How do you deal with that? Because you also have to worry about people with allergies coming to the dome.
Yes, that is a problem, and I'm not sure there's really a solution about that unless you specifically have a program for people, you know, who are, I don't know, allergy compromised. I'm not really sure what the correct phrase is to say that this program, you know, will not have animals. But then you're into the situation where that person might need the animal. Possibly you could have a separate section of the planetarium that does not have animals in that.
Is it inclusive enough to put on the website that people with service animals should contact the planetarium so that we can make special arrangements?
I think it depends on your location, and it also depends on, your country and even your local ordinances about service animals. In the US, service animals are allowed anywhere, that you don't need to make a special reservation or anything. One problem that has come up is people, I don't know what the right phrase is, people using imposter service animals, which are trying to bring in their pets. Service animals are trained in specific tasks, and they are very well behaved. If somebody came in with a dog on a leash and the dog is jumping, barking, sniffing, really not attentive to their person, I think that's where you get the problem. But as far as in the US, people do not have to make an advance reservation about a service animal. But I think if somebody had a medical condition about allergies, I think that maybe you might want to think about putting something on the website for special situations, or I'm not really sure how to word that, but just to make
Yeah,
sure.
no, exactly. How to separate the two somehow.
Yeah. Let's see, any other thoughts about your experiences?
We have one hand here from Anna Green,
Mhm.
and it'll have to be our last one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to second regarding the service dogs. I know at least in the United States, a colleague of mine is a service dog trainer, and yeah, those dogs are a tool to keep people alive in a lot of situations. So you have no right to tell them they cannot bring the dog in, at least in the United States. And you also have no right to ask them what their disability is and why they would need that dog. You can ask them if the dog is a service animal, and you can ask them what the dog has been trained to do. And when you ask them what the dog has been trained to do, that is a very gray area. Even though you can legally ask, it could cause them to divulge what their need for the dog is that they legally do not have to tell you. So that question is kind of an iffy one. They can sue you if you tell them they cannot bring the dog in. The only way you can tell them to take the dog out is, as Noreen said, if the dog is not under control, or if the dog defecates, urinates, whatever in the building is not housebroken. Aside from that, they do not have to show you any documentation whatsoever. All they have to do is tell you, this is my service dog, period. And I know at least in Germany, service dogs are treated, service dogs can come in, that's not an issue. They wear the vests. I'm not 100% certain on all the ordinances within Europe, but I would imagine that there are similarities. But yeah, as Noreen said, definitely need to look into that. But keeping in mind, I realize allergies can be severe, but also those dogs are there usually to keep people alive as well.
Very good points, Anna.
All right, any final comments, Noreen here? All right, thanks, Noreen. Really great information, and a lot of information in the chat here too coming through. Our last speaker is Grayling here, and I'm going to turn it over to him. Still have about 15 minutes. We're going to go a little into the scheduled break time, but it'll be worth it because Grayling has a wonderful presentation ready for you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Just want to make sure, I'll try to keep it timely, but I'll share my screen. I am going to be talking about events and planning around diversity and inclusion. So to start with it again, my name's Grayling Mercer. I'm the Hoffman Planetarium Director in Oak Park, Michigan. I'm also a science teacher. I'm actually the K-12 science instructional lead. So been doing it for over 20 years. I like it, I love it, I want more of it. So to give you a little bit of perspective, I'm in Michigan and in the United States, and Oak Park is located right where that red star is, and it's not far from Detroit. As a matter of fact, 75% of our students come from Detroit, and 99% or 97% of our students are people of color. And by the way, if there's questions in the chat, I might not see them. So if someone could say, that would be awesome.
I got you.
And thank you so much. And so something that I think is important to remember is insights, connectedness. I'm going to talk about being connected a lot and engaged, right? So this is my dome, and like the DEI committee, something that I talk about is including and connecting with everybody, no matter what the different backgrounds, and being able to participate now in science. So as an educator, I'm now put my science hat on, right? So how do I address the inequities, I should say, in science? So how? One of the ideas, and I actually talked about this summer at the Spitz Institute. I did it last year, but you can create different types of shows, actually content in the planetarium that shows both the uniqueness and the interconnectedness of all the cultures. One example, putting that planetarium and astronomy hat on, is looking at different cultures. For example, the Big Dipper or Ursa Major, there's so many stories. I wrote a show on something called The Drinking Gourd, and that deals with African-American slaves. There are Native American shows. There are shows from different cultures. If there was a comment once in a meeting, and one of the suggestions was it's very difficult because we're science folks, right? Understanding different cultures and history outside of our own, outside of, our own natural culture. But again, I would always suggest no one ever learned a language without doing a little research, doing a little background. So research, research, research. Also, talking about partnering with organizations, that was mentioned earlier. Things that I did in my district, I was able to partner with, for example, U of M chemistry for the young ladies. It was called Girls in Engineering, both middle and high school. And NASA, we had a program called Girls Steam Ahead with NASA. So we had elementary school girls do that. And then finally, we had Native American students actually do in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, that little bunny ear thing at the top of the map. We had them, and we did programs and outreach there. We also, with the help of Microsoft, that was a big help this year, particularly virtually. I had a lot of folks through virtually with the help of Microsoft, because they had a lot of programming where they did virtual shows, virtual tours, virtual book readings for the little ones. So they did a lot. And one of the big things, obviously, having such a large and high percentage of people of color, we had activities every day for Black History Month that were virtual shows. There were activities, there were actually virtual tours of all the museums around the country. So that's something that works here in this country. But those are things, there's virtual tours and things that you can do, especially if you're not open in the time that we're living now. Additionally, this is something that as educators, see, we are all educators. There's print material, and it's just a matter of background and research. We did two different, one, we did a Black History Month Gazette. So weekly we did handouts, right? And it was connected to a website that I created for the planetarium. And so teachers could register all month long for Black History Month events on the website. And it was the same for the next month for Women's History. We had only 3 for during Pride Month. So we're looking to expand doing more things for inclusion. And finally, we need to be able to provide opportunities for our students to see themselves in our breakout room. We talked about having, being in different areas and wanting to include more and get different people in. One of the things that we did was for our area, I encompassed Minecraft. So we did lots of Minecraft activities where they would come in, they work on the computer, then the pandemic came and they worked virtually. But we stuck with a lot of civil rights things and making sure they could see themselves, my students could see themselves in the people that we brought in. And we even had an astrophysicist from NASA come in. So we want to encourage the young ladies, we want to encourage the young men. So that's kind of our thing. We want people to be able to feel represented. And I think that's the connectedness that we talk about. That being said, so it's the what now, right? How do we move forward? How do we do events and planning? And the thing I always suggest is take a minute, and you don't have to do it with me here or us to write it down, because I want to make sure that we have the time to move ahead. But what I want you to think about is, could you commit to doing at least one activity, whether it be a handout, whether it be the Girl Scouts group that Girl Scouts can get their astronomy badge, have groups. What can I do? Is there an activity at my planetarium that supports diversity, equity, inclusion? Do one thing, because if you do one thing this year, you could do two things next year, and now you've doubled your activities. So I just think it's just start with one thing, and then we move from there. Are there questions? Minecraft is great. Are there any? I just see the chat. Any questions? Also, if I could make a suggestion, having content. Oh, I'm sorry, I could stop sharing. I apologize. Having content online really makes a difference. And if later, or I guess I could share the website that I put together. And what it did is it gave, and if you want to collaborate or work with me on doing anything around the world, I think it's great because there's different cultures, and doing shows, sub-shows, mini shows that just highlight different cultures, I think really helps share. And that's something, it's knowledge that we can gain. So without that, I wanna keep us on schedule, I believe.
All right, I think we do have some time for any questions, or maybe just some events that maybe you did recently that you want to share, some handouts that you have that you want to share that you think might help other facilities. Anyone who wants to speak up, go ahead.
I can, while I'm waiting, I can share and I can show something that I did that really helped. And it worked in our area because, and so this is a safe space. We're all safe. While I teach in a very racially not diverse school district, the districts around are. And so it gave, when I did the activities that are on that website, the thing that was interesting was Big Astronomy. That's a free show that I believe helps. I'm sorry, I see something about South American communities. It just hit me. But something that helped is the communities around. So it actually grew. In my district, I have 4,000 students. We had over 10,000 people attend our online activities. So it wasn't all our students. So it was a lot of students from the surrounding districts, and a lot of districts that were primarily European had lots of attendance, and they felt like it really helped support their African-American history. Big astronomy. Oh, and women's history. Let me share what we did for women's history. So these things just give you an idea. And lots of corporations are looking for things especially to do, and grants. So if you're willing to put a little work in, there are always grants out there to support, especially the thing is learning loss now, and support those communities that have lots of students who've been online for a whole year. So that's always an opportunity.
Great. Any further questions? You could post things in the chat. I just want to thank all of our speakers, Grayling, Noreen, Andy, Shannon. Tremendous work from all of you. And I know that there's so much incredible work happening all throughout the field in these efforts. So just know that the EDI committee is there to support all of you. If you have any questions, anything that you want to say to us, we have our email that you can always reach out to us through. And then at the end of the session, we have a survey that you can, just a couple of simple questions, you can offer feedback that way as well. So thank you all so much for your time. It's been really great to hear about all of this and to take some time to reflect on where we are as an organization and where we can aspire to be. With that, I think we'll turn it over to Michael, who might introduce our break.
Yes, that break is just raring to go. But thank you to Dana and to Danny and the rest of the EDI team. And like Danny said, we have a break currently. It runs until 19:30 UTC, so about 25 more minutes. And then we'll kick into the Portable Planetarium Committee presentation chaired by Susan Button. So until then, we will, of course, pause the recording.
Where in California are you, Marco?
Right now, I am in Auburn, near San Francisco, in the northern California.
Yeah, I'd invite you to Santa Cruz, but I'm not there. I'm in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay.
Sorry, Marco, where did you say you were?
Auburn.
Oh, Auburn. Oh, you're very far north of California, of San Francisco.
Yes, I have been in the southern California, Los Angeles and all that, but now I came north. And I could get my second vaccine here, by the way, which I'm very grateful for.
Yay!
Everybody is grateful for vaccines, or should be.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. For those of you who have come in a little bit later, I see we got one more person. Great. We're now into the home stretch of the 2021 IPS vCon. Our last two sessions this afternoon, each will run about 45 minutes. Our first is going to be led by Susan Button. And this, of course, is the Portable Planetariums Committee presentation. Susan, whatever you need from a tech standpoint from me, just let me know, but the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Would you pull up the website for the Portable Planetarium? And while he's doing that, I'll let you know I've reached out to Portable Planetarium folks in all of the contacts that I've had and then Dome dialogues, and I got about 20 responses from different people in 10 different countries. Today, we're going to be having 6 presentations from some of the people that said they had something to share. The rest of the people, it was pretty much they are not open, or if they are, they've had maybe 1 or 2 cases where they could have shows. And the only 2 exceptions were Hiroshi Futumi from Tokyo, Japan. He's been on and off able to go to schools depending on the COVID situation. And Jaap Vreeling, who I believe is here from St. Eustatius, part of the Netherlands, he's on an island, so they have very few cases of COVID. So he's done many hundreds of children in his portable planetarium. So that was interesting. I have the Portable Planetarium Committee has been existing for 33 years. With the help of our Mobile Dome community, I've been writing a column called Mobile News Network in the IPS journal Planetarium since 1990. This column addresses the specific concerns of mobile and small domes, as well as information about live interactive techniques in small domes. All of the committee members, you can see Marco and Alan and Oded and Guillermo and Loris have been involved in making it possible to serve IPS, informing me of events and new Mobile Dome colleagues, as well as suggesting international initiatives that serve the entire community. First of those was initiated by Loris Ramponi, and I am so grateful for his ingenious creativity in all the things that we do together. I would like you to go to the resource page, Portable Planetariums, and you will see that there are many resources available for you. Some of them have to do with COVID and how to manage opening or keeping safe in the dome. A business model from Costa Rica. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, there's a list of people all the way down. Okay, way down at the bottom, Portable Planetarium contacts. There's someone in most of the countries that are affiliates of IPS who's basically established as the contact for Portable Planetarium. Some countries, it's just the representative from the regional group. And of course, this is another opportunity for you to volunteer if there's no person that's directly using a portable in your region who's a contact person. You can be that contact person. It doesn't take a bunch of time. It's just I pass information to you from the committee, you pass it to the people that you know in your community, and then vice versa. So thank you for thinking about that, and for all those people that have been doing it over the years. This is not a current list, but it's pretty comprehensive. It will be updated. Today we have several, as I said, Mobile Dome directors who would like to share some news with you. So let's begin with Marco Avalos from Costa Rica. Marcos, take it away.
Well, thank you a lot. I should be able to share my screen.
Marco, you should be all set.
Yeah, let me see. I got it here. Okay, let me play this one. Well, since we got all our domes stored since last year, we started thinking about the unthinkable. That was putting our mobile dome outside. We always neglected that. We avoided because of obvious reasons, you know, wind, rain, sun, all of that doesn't work. But some outdoor activities like astronomy, camping, we thought, well, we could take one of our domes there, and that's what I want to talk about. So this is what we did, what we do. So we took one of our domes and put it in the open completely, and had several telescopes during a camping activity. So we thought that it would be complementing each other, as it really did. So which conditions did we require? Well, no wind, that's the main thing, and no rain. So we did this in our sunny summer. I always joke that Costa Rica is summer all year long. We have just a sunny summer and rainy summer. So during our sunny summer, we did this early this year. So you see the camping site being set there. So no wind, no rain, and of course some electricity. The dome that we can use here is our old dome. We have a new digital Starlab dome, but it's cloth fabric. They cannot get wet at all. But this one is nylon fabric. It's almost plastic. And some years before, we had painted it from the inside. So we kind of be able to use it for longer, although it's quite trashed, really, but it's still working. So we took it out here. And the thing about these domes, especially the colleagues that have used this type of domes like Kang and I think some of you there have owned this dome. The ventilation system is a blower in a tunnel, and a big tunnel that you can see there next to the car. The amount of air that goes out is enormous, so it feels very ventilated. So we dare to do this. These are the protocols we used. Masks, always on, but only taking family groups at a time. It was a camping astronomy night. We had all night long, like for 40, 50 people. So we could take our time and take in just each family one at a time. And so we felt that was quite safe, and they really enjoyed that. Of course, we applied cleaning their hands upon entering and disinfection after they went out. Their reaction was quite good. They felt comfortable being there. So we thought this was quite good, a nice experience. You had a planetarium, telescopes, and the people there. So we just add wine and marshmallows. It was quite good. And the thing is, if If it is cloudy, the planetarium will save the day. If there is wind, but clear skies, the telescopes save the day. And sometimes we succeeded with both things that were the best. But we had a couple of experiences where we could not set the planetarium up at all because of the wind. Okay, so it doesn't always work. Just to be clear on that. So what are we planning? Well, we think it was a good experience. We got a little bit of money too. So we'll keep doing this, but we know there are much better domes for outdoor activities. This one was not precisely designed to be put outside, but eventually we will, yeah, for sure go for an outdoor mobile dome, a proper one. Okay, well, that's it from me.
Wonderful. Oh, that's terrific. I'm glad it was successful. And I see in the chat, many people have had some very interesting experiences. We may be able to have some time at the end to talk about some of these things, but we will move on in the interest of time. The next person, thank you, Marco. The next person is Guillermo Marengo. Can't pronounce your last name, Guillermo, very well. Are you here?
Yes.
Can you take it over? Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like Michael to share this video for you?
You can share the video. That's okay for me.
Okay, great. Thank you. Michael?
I do not believe that I have the video. If you've sent it to me, then it'll take a minute or two to get it set up.
Okay.
No problem. I can present here.
Oh, okay.
And Guillermo, you are set to share, so you're good.
Thank you. Okay. So last year I was here presenting in the Portable group about the activities we made during 2019. This is my state in the south of Brazil. Here is the Uruguayan border. I am here just 60 kilometers and the border to Argentina. The state is about 700 kilometers in each direction here. And we have a fixed planetarium in my city and other 2 cities in the state. In 2019, we traveled all over the state. And during these travels, we had our activities with school groups, about 15,000 kids in 1 year. But we also had teachers training courses in each city we visit. And for these people, we had a questionnaire and about 252 people answered the questionnaire, the people in teachers training course. And we asked about parents' education level, family income, gender, age, and of course, if they have ever visited a planetarium.
Guillermo, just a quick heads up, we're not seeing any of the slide changes yet.
Sorry. Stop share again. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Just go ahead. And what we got from the results that 145 people from 252 have never visited the planetarium before. And only 13 people have visited a planetarium less than 1 year. And the people visited the planetarium with the school, not with their family. What we learned from this questionnaire is that the two most important questions to visit the planetarium is the family income and the distance to the nearest planetarium. This can be quite obvious, but the data we got from the questionnaire was more specific than that. If we consider different ranges of family income from $0 to $400, from 400 to 1,000, and from 1,000 to 2,000, people on the second range, from 400 to 1,000, can have 2 times more chance to visit the planetarium than people with lower income. If people with higher income from $1,000 to $2,000, considering the error bars, they can have 15 times more chance to visit the planetarium than someone in the lower range. And we also found that considering the distance to the nearest planetarium, considering 100 kilometers distance, each 100 kilometers you are away from the planetarium, your chance to visit the planetarium decays about 68%. So someone that is 200 kilometers away from a planetarium have half of chance to visit the planetarium than someone that is close to a planetarium. Considering that, and that we have 3 fixed domes in my state, those with the circles with 100 kilometers radius, so the chance decays in 68%, we can think about the future planetarium installations here. We also have 3 mobile planetariums that doesn't travel a lot. They do most of their activity in their own cities. And we can think about the next cities to install planetariums, fixed or mobiles, that could be in the purple circles. Thanks very much.
That is very good information to remind us of how important portables are, because they can reach areas that are lower income and also you know, farther from the dome. So we can do most everything that a stationary dome can do, but we can take it on the road. Is of course the advantage. We're the hardest hit community in terms of COVID because of the small and enclosed dome, but as Marco has showed us, and we'll see a few other people are starting to open their domes with various techniques. But it's really worth it to keep these mobile domes going, so don't give up. Thank you, Guilherme. Let's move on to Leonel Ruiz sent me a couple of PowerPoints, but he's unable to be here. So Diana, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, that's Diana.
Diana Salazar will be taking over for Leonel.
Okay, can I share my screen?
You are ready to go.
Thanks, Michael. So let's see. Can you see my screen okay? Okay, fantastic.
Yes, yes.
All right, let me start with this. So guys, I'm really glad to be here. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening here in Barcelona. I'm here today on behalf of Leonel Ruiz, the director of the Planetarium of Marsella. And I'm actually inviting you to join our group. The group I'm going to present you today is the LSS group. And here you have what is it all about. So there is a system that is called the Lumo Sky System. This is actually a project to build a planetarium that is very affordable for everyone. So this is a system to allow people that don't have very big budgets to build their own planetarium systems, projection. And as you can see here, this is an open hardware. So it's Creative Commons. Anybody can access the instructions to do that. And there is more really interesting things. Lionel actually is the co-founder of this initiative. And I can tell you a little bit more about this group. We are based in France, but we speak many languages. So this is how we can invite you to come with us. And how did we cope with COVID? So we found a couple of ways. There's actually something that you can see on the bottom right. And this is actually a solution that I've seen in many places, which is just a tilted dome and then an open space that opens a lot of possibilities. I've actually been to a show like this myself. It's been a successful solution installed in the Maritime Museum of Barcelona. So there are shows going on like that there, and children actually seem very happy. I heard no complaints, at least in the shows that I was witness to. And then I also wanted to talk to you real quick about something that is called the continuous mechanical ventilation, if I'm not mistaken. So it's continuous, or as you will see now, it's controlled as well. Sometimes it's called controlled. And what you see here, it's one of the two ways in which you can actually try that for you. So the goal will be to get the hot air from the projector out of the planetarium, and then actually all the breathing as well. You can install the CMV inside your dome, but you can also do what is been done here, which is to have it set somehow that you can have it in the outside. So both of those are possible for you. And how else that we did to cope with the COVID. So these people you see here are actually part of the LSS group. These are where actually on a weekly basis, Zoom meetings, which everybody was doing during the pandemic. So we did the same, but we tried to spice up things by inviting everyone to do different activities. We also had people from the outside invited, but most of the people that you see here are volunteers. They gladly give up their free time and to build tools for the whole community. So the things that I'm going to present to you are things that you can actually start using right now. And one of them is Spacecrafter. So Spacecrafter, it's a planetarium software that is actually supported by two very important companies that we thank very much for their help. One of them is Phoenix Full Dome Productions, and the other one is Immersive Adventure. The people you see there are the volunteers that I was talking about. And what can you find with the Spacecrafter? So how about star movements? Do you want to see how stars will look in 150,000 years? You've got it. So you want interactive games? You've got it also. Here you have one that you can use the joystick with, and you need to place the planets in correct order. We also have moon stories and sky stories, which means you can place the stories in the part of the world that you actually hear them. And there's a lot of things like that. Like this software has a lot to offer. You can check it out yourself. The HR diagram with the masses of the stars. And then we can also do moon walks and Mars walks. Actually, you can see Mars from all around if you try. And there's a lot of information, as you can see, around the panels here. And what else we do in the group? You can do it as well. We can talk about other planetariums like the one that you see on the left, on the upper hand side. And this is actually the Nazca Planetarium. So we talk about the lines of Nazca, or we talk about the later developments in the space industry. We can also talk about people in the astronomy domain that we don't really know anything about, women in the astronomy, history of astronomy, or maybe how about for Grayling and for Andy that we're talking about cultures and in inclusion and everything. So we have on the top right a map of how different cultures can see the same set of stars. So you can see this one here that you probably are familiar with, so the Big Bear, and the constellations, how other civilizations can actually see these shapes. And just before I finish, I want to leave you with a gift. This one you can pick up. It's actually done thanks to the hard work of the volunteers of the LSS group that I can introduce you a little better if anybody has questions. So go ahead and you can pick this up. I'll make sure to put it in the chat as well. And I'm ready if you have any questions, if you want to ask in English, in French, in Portuguese. I have someone also in the audience that can help me with that. And so come on, shoot it at me. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, that's wonderful. My first question is, what is this continuous mechanical ventilation system? Can you put that in the chat as to where you get that or what it's called?
Yes, actually, this is one of the systems that exists in the market. This is something that you can place inside. And I actually, I wish Lionel was here to give you more technical details about it. But basically, it works like the ventilation system in your house. You install it there, you put it, there is a motor that is connected to it, and it's actually should be very quiet. But if you allow me a couple of minutes, I will come back to you with a lot of links, with at least one link that will give you the information, or else you can write to my address directly. But really, this CMB thing, I've seen in France, I've seen in Spain, and I'm sure that in the States, you'll get a lot of those. If you go to any ventilation system company, they might be able to explain a little bit about that.
Great, that's wonderful. I've heard of this system, building your own planetarium all over the world. People are doing it. It's on the website for the Portable Planetarium Committee. The link to be able to see the directions on how to build your own planetarium. The latest people that have been speaking to me are in Africa, and they are so looking for solutions with low cost. And that is definitely one of them. So thank you so much.
I have to mention just that the Ips Lumo is the creator actually of this system, and its information, it's there in the last slide. So give him a shout anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you. If we have some more time, we will come back with some of the questions that are in the chat, or people can ask questions. Thank you so much. Ken, you are up next. Ken Brandt.
Okay, Michael, can I share my screen, please?
You're all set, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time it is in your time zone. How you doing? I'm Ken Brandt. I direct the Robinson Planetarium in North Carolina in the United States. I'm looking for a present button here. There we go. Hopefully you're seeing a green screen with black letters on it.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So our district, our school district, which I work in, is gradually moving back to face-to-face classroom experiences and field trip experiences. And with our summer camp program this year, we incorporated the inflatable planetarium I'm now running in an old elementary school cafeteria, and you'll see a picture of that in a minute. But as the kids are getting off the bus, imagine, if you will, about a 30-foot long sidewalk with a covering over it so that they don't get rained on. I have the children line up and establish their 3-foot distance by just sticking an arm out. If you're touching someone, you're too close. So that's the easy way to do that. Everybody uses hand sanitizer prior to entry. So, and I'm the first one in the line. I do the hand sanitizer thing with myself. Once I get inside, I grab the handheld temperature gun, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe it, and do my own temperature first, and then do them to make sure a leader should be willing to do everything he's going to subject his charges to. And so I do the same thing. Then I tell everybody we're going to play the far away game. I tell them that as they're all lined up outside as a way of introduction. And the far away game is find the furthest cone away from you, away from the door as you're coming in. So you can see on the floor here in the second picture to the left, the cones, the children stand at these cones like you're seeing in the middle picture here, or the third picture from the left, and they stand and they're approximately 3 feet apart. You can see kids on the right-hand screen here interacting with the exhibits in the cafeteria / science center. Now, on the very left-hand image here is my secret weapon, which I'm going to share with all of you because we have no secrets here. Okay, so this is inside the inflatable, fully inflated. You can see NASA stickers on the floor here, and I put them out very deliberately so they're about 3 feet apart. Once everybody gets seated, and this is another opportunity to play that away from the door game. When they come in through the zipper door, the inflatable, I tell them to find the sticker furthest away from this door. That eases the bunching that you get around entryways and exitways. And so that helps a lot. And so far, the kids have been pretty compliant about that. Likewise, they've been very compliant about wearing masks all the time while they're inside. But my air purifier here cleans the air inside the dome a minimum of 5 times a minute on its medium setting. Now, of course, I have this thing ramped up full bore when I've got people in there. It's running at 100%. So I'm not sure what the rate of cleaning the air is. And I'll be happy to provide you more information about the type of system I'm using later on, or I'll stick it in the chat or something later. But you can see inside the dome, we're able to maintain that 3 foot of social distancing. The adults sit around the very edge in the back, and usually there's a maximum of 2 or 3 adults that are in the room with us, and I'm able to distance them 6 feet away. So, and this is a 6-meter dome. So with this configuration, I'm able to get 20 students plus adults in at one time. And I've been very deliberate and very careful about this. And of course, I've been reading everything Pat Reif and Marco have been putting out about how to distance in the dome in this new environment we're in. And you can see a bunch of pictures of the kids in the Science Center here. That's me interacting with some of the kids, one of our interactive touch screens we got. Thank you, Clark Planetarium, by the way. The kids are a little bit too close in this lower right-hand picture. We've solved that by putting another table here. So there's actually 2 tables there now, and that gets everybody a little bit further away from one another. It's not perfect. You know, if I said everybody maintain 3 feet of distance all the time, I would be lying to you because it just is impossible. They're children. Children, as you know, tend to clump. And so I try very hard to prevent that from happening, but I'm only human and there's only one of me. So I'd welcome any suggestions you all have for how to maintain this going into the fall session, which we're going to be doing live face-to-face visits as of today. That situation may be evolving due to the recent COVID surge in my part of the world. Let's see, is this the last slide? I believe it is. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your experience, and also, the questions that you still have. I did receive from Germany a nice visual of how to position people in the dome or how they're doing it, which I'll share on the IPS website. But this is good information. Thank you. Pat, you're up next, and maybe you can answer some of those questions. Pat Reif from Rice University in Texas.
Okay, so I'm going to actually do 2 presentations here. First, I'm going to do Carolyn Sumner's. She is on the road and will try to jump in if she can. If not, Adam Barnes is also here, can answer more technical questions about her presentation. So let me start hers, and then after hers, I will do mine. And so let me know if you have trouble hearing.
Faced with the COVID challenge,
Can you hear it?
we tilted our portable dome sideways at about 45 degrees, keeping the hemispherical shape. This dish is negative pressure with a small fan to suck up the interior screen. We wanted to offer every program shown in our Discovery Dome on our dish alternative. The projector could be a tilted fisheye system or a warped image projected on a mirror, as you see here. We warped fisheye frames in Digistar, but pre-warped content also works. To market the dish, we produced this video.
This is the Houston Museum of Natural Science's brand new Discovery Dish, making the immersive Burke-Baker Planetarium experience portable and COVID safe. Unlike the Discovery Dome's enclosed hemisphere, the dish allows us to socially distance our audience members in a well-ventilated space. It still allows us to present our entire catalog of shows with selections appropriate to ages from preschool through high school, and even adults. And the re-engineered projection surface results in a brighter, sharper image than ever before. In honor of the 2021 landing of NASA's Perseverance rover and Ingenuity helicopter, we have produced new shows which will bring the experience to you. Each audience member will sit on one of the foam squares which you see in the foreground. As long as they remain on the square, proper social distancing is guaranteed. We can accommodate an entire class for each presentation. We can present a new show every half hour. You can book a half-day, full-day, or extended day visit, reaching from 5 to 13 classes. To bring the Discovery Dish to your school or organization, all we need is a large, well-ventilated space with a 12-foot ceiling and one 110-volt electrical outlet. Book the interactive, immersive Discovery Dish now and bring the adventure of the Perseverance rover and Ingenuity helicopter to your students.
The dish sets up using a grid and socially distanced squares. Content includes the night sky, Big Bird, and even a trip with the Zuma Patrol. A presentation can be in a large classroom, a cafeteria, or gym. Windows should always be behind the dish and not shining directly into it. Here, James Wooten, our planetarium astronomer, answers questions during a live night sky presentation. For T-Rex Week at the museum, we set up a dish in an enclosed exhibit area to show the dinosaur portion of Earth's Wild Ride, featuring the T-Rex. For the program, kids chose the floor while parents sat in the surrounding chairs. The program began with a trip to the real moon using open space. The presenter can use a tablet or the keyboard of the projection laptop. The audience joins a grandfather with his grandchildren on the future moon. He tells the story of an asteroid that once hit Earth and killed the dinosaurs.
Crashed through Earth's atmosphere and hit the ocean, sending jets of water skyward. When it reached the seafloor, its impact shook the entire planet.
Dinosaurs were afraid.
Grandpa, don't you miss Earth? Oh, a little, I guess. But I'll always have my stories to tell, and the Earth will always be outside my window, shining down on our colony.
For T-Rex Week this July, astronomy interns did 193 presentations and entertained 2,200 museum visitors.
Okay, so that's Carolyn's presentation. And she's found it to be really a very helpful way of maintaining spacing and good airflow during COVID. So if anybody has any specific questions, We can put it in the chat. We can answer it live. But meanwhile, I need to go on to now my presentation.
Thank you.
And so that is going to be a PowerPoint, which is a little trickier. So let's start that. Now, oops, I forgot to share first. Hang on. Sorry, I gotta share the screen first. Now, and by the way, that video is on YouTube if you want to see it. All right, now are you seeing the proper screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is sort of an update of our pandemic protocols. Susan showed the website that has the link to our previous one. We've now, improved it and updated it, so I'm going to show a few pieces from that. So a lot of planetariums, had to go dark, and this is what we've been up to. So our solutions have been Zoom, Dish, and Dome. You just saw her presentation. I'm going to give you a little statistic. They started offering these to go out to schools and summer camps. They offered only the Dish for June and got 7 bookings of the Dish. After June, they allowed the schools to choose between the Dish and the Dome, and virtually all of them, the new bookings have been for the Dome, not the Dish. But here's the link to her video, and here's some more information on the ePlanetarium site of the information on the Dish itself. Let's see. So the question then is, we also now use Zoom. We were basically all completely virtual for 2020. So from the summer to fall 2020, we hosted over 50 virtual events. Some were full planetarium shows in cropped format with subtitles. We did live Skype shows from Digistar in cropped warp format. We had Spanish audio planetarium shows with Spanish narrators that would answer questions in Spanish. And then we also had live events such as the SpaceX launches and solstices at the Dome and everything. In total, we had over 2,000 participants that participated in one or other of our virtual events, and we did it all for free, but we allowed people to donate, and we got enough to make us feel good about it. And here's the calendar, and it will show you the ones we did and the ones that are upcoming. So so the question is, why do we use the cropped warped format when we do it online? And the answer is, it really gives you a very broad view to give you some more of the Dome than you'd get from a typical VR. So if you try to show a fisheye movie to someone who's never been in a Dome, that is very, very confusing to them because there's people upside down in the back that don't make sense. But it is true, you get the entire field of view. On the other hand, if you warp from mirror, you actually do get the entire field of view, but the sides and the back are a little distorted. But you notice the sweet area, the part that bounces off the nearly flat part of the mirror, is almost no distortion at all. And so we have a tendency to then just crop this to 1280 by 720, and you get a full 180 across. So here, in contrast, here's what the piece of what you'd get from a VR viewer, and you have zero peripheral information. You'd have to turn your head, and of course you can't do that when you're doing it on a Zoom. Now you could do it if you're doing a YouTube Live 360, which we also have done some of. All right, so here's what the same view on the cropped warped would be, and so you see this bird coming down at you. So you get the peripheral vision telling you that things are coming at you. The other nice thing about using Zoom and sharing just part of the screen is we can control it all with Media Show. We can turn on and off the subtitles if the people that are on there would like subtitles. We can have multi-language subtitles, so we can show the English version with Spanish subtitles or the Spanish version with English subtitles or whatever, and it's very easy to control with media show and only show a part of the screen. There's some movies of this frame in action in various formats. If you go to our ePlanetarium site under the demos, and here is this write-up that Susan already has. Now the next thing is, what about COVID protocols? And again, Susan posted our one that we did last summer, where we talked about using 2 meter spacing, which really cuts down the number of people in a dome. And personally, I didn't do any live portable dome events between February 2020 until June of this summer, when I was fully vaccinated. So you do have to be vigilant, but we do have now some protocols that do seem to work, and these are now loosened from the previous one. So you have to obey all local restrictions, taking temperature for people coming in, all visitors and staff wear masks, 3-foot spacing, and we use chairs. And by using chairs, it forces them to sit in that 3-foot spacing. The chairs in the front of the dome are lower chairs. We like a 10 to 15 minute air out between groups, and you can use a UV lamp. Positive pressure flow through is really critical, because you get that air changing every minute or so, just from the air that holds up the dome. And then putting your portable in a big room helps, because then you're exchanging not just with air in your local dome, but all over. Here's a cheap UV lamp you can set in the middle, and it's like $40 on Amazon. Here's a sample spacing of chairs at 3-foot spacing in a dome, and the air inlet comes in at the mirror and air exhaust out the front. So it's a constant airflow, because most of the transmission is through the air, not through touch. Here are some of the students that I had in the dome this summer. These were all high school students, so I used a smaller group. Everybody used masks. Here were the elementary group, same dome, 6-meter dome, and we had a few extra, because we let the youngest ones sit in the front on the ground. So yeah, you can do it. You have to remember, most transmissions through the air. HM&S is now getting bookings for the dish and the domes. All of our Discovery Dome customers around the world are starting to get bookings again, and we're really excited about that. Immersive Experiences in the UK have both dishes and domes available, and have gotten a lot of new bookings, including one school that's even scheduled it every month. Oh yeah, and short. Definitely you want to have short presentations, because with short presentations you're less likely to transmit. So having a shorter presentation means you're exposed to that evil air less time. So got to stop in my 5 minutes. And
excellent. Thank you so much. And I think I've heard people also bringing air from the outdoors through windows and pumping in to get more fresh air going circulating, especially in Japan. Thank you so much, everyone. I knew this was going to happen. Our time is gone, right? I'm going to be going through the chat and pulling out questions and trying to get something up on the webpage that records what you asked and some answers. And also, I'm going to be using some of this information in my next column, of course, probably December. So we'll try and keep this information going for you. So go to the IPS website, go to Get Involved, and you will be inspired. There's lots and lots to do in IPS. Thanks so much.
Susan, I wanted
so
to
much.
throw in something really fast. In between shows is that whole cleaning routine that none of us talked about, but that I'm sure we all do. You know, the wiping down, the mopping of the floor, and all that other stuff, and wiping down the Science Center exhibits in my case. But I just wanted to point that out. That's also necessary.
Yeah, thanks for that. Important. Thank you, Michael, for your help.
Absolutely. And thank you, Susan and the team for a wonderful Portable Planetariums Committee presentation. Brings us to our final session of the 2021 IPS vCon. This is the history of the Planetarium Working Group, chaired by Dr. Pedro Raposo of the Adler Planetarium. This is bringing the history of planetaria to life. Pedro, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone from the Adler Planetarium. I will try to share my screen. Let's see, can everyone see my slides? Okay, okay, great, thank you. Again, hello everyone. Very pleased to be connecting with you all. So as Michael said, my name is Pedro Raposo. I'm a historian of science with a great interest in the history of planetaria. And I was lucky enough to get a job as a curator in a planetarium that has historical collections. So right now behind me, you can see the kinds of items that we have at the Adler, besides of course the normal things that you usually find in a planetarium. So we are home to a great collection of historical artifacts, archives, etc. And since our group is a bit recent, our own history is still quite short. I think it's worth beginning with a recap of the group, how the group came about, what we want to do, what we are doing already, and also we would like to talk a bit about things that we want to do in the future. So the group formed was launched in August 2020 during the virtual IPS conference. And one of the great promoters of the group was the past president of the IPS, Mark Subarow, who I believe is in attendance today. So Mark at the time came to me and asked, hey, would you like to help form something in the IPS, some group that would, well, support the Centennial group in all kinds of things related to the history of planetaria, and also create a group that would serve as kind of a bridge between people who are in the planetarium world and who are very interested in the history of planetaria, but also people who are not necessarily in the planetarium world. And I have several colleagues who are historians of science and historians of astronomy who have done fascinating and really interesting work, but they are not necessarily connected with the realm of planetaria. So the group was also formed with this rationale that this is a good time because we have the centennial. We'll be thinking about the history of the planetarium and the history of the profession. And we also have this group of these people who are not necessarily connected with the planetarium world, but are working on the subject already. So this is how the group came about. We have 7 members as of now. Most of them are historians, some are planetariums, very experienced planetariums. One of them is my Adler colleague, Mike Smale, with whom I'll be sharing speaking duties today for this session. So I will call Mike in a few moments to step in. For now, I just wanted to make a call here. If you are interested in the history of planetarium and if you'd like to get involved with our group, please reach out. So we have a page on the IPS website. If you go to the committee section, so you can find our page, and please, we have our contact information there. So please reach out if you'd like to get more closely involved with our group. As you can see on the screen, we define our function in short as to promote research and outreach in history of planetaria. So we want not only to promote research that help us better understand the history of planetaria, but we also want to tell the stories of planetaria to an audience as broad as possible. And of course, we also want to promote the preservation and accessibility of source materials, which can be archives, machines, and all sorts of other things. So again, our group, one of the functions, the current functions in our group is to collaborate directly with the Centennial group, but we have picked up already on 2 kind of sort of flagship projects, which we're now going to talk about. One is a series of webinars with which we really want to create these regular events where we can hear different perspectives on how to preserve the history of planetaria, what to preserve, how we can do that, and how we can tell the stories of planetaria. And the other project is a book about the history of planetaria, which we hope will be more than just a book written by a few people, will be a kind of a collective, a collaborative effort within IPS. I'll tell you more about the book in a few minutes, but now I will call up Mike Smale, who will tell you a bit more about our webinar series. Mike, I suppose you must be around.
I am.
All right.
Wonderful, thanks, Pedro. So to introduce folks who may not be familiar with our History of the Planetarium Working Group webinar series, we had our first webinar approximately 1 year ago, last September, and it was focused on the history of planetaria, but more specifically on what do we preserve and how do we do it. And with presentations from Germany to Chicago, Louisiana to Washington, DC, it was a true cosmic gumbo, an assemblage of facilities, both large and small, able to dig into what can be a very difficult question. You know, our facilities sometimes can feel like sort of technological, Wunderkammern, these facilities with just technology on top of technology. And how do we make those decisions on what we decide to keep? And then how do we go through that sort of storage and preservation process? So that's pretty exciting. You can watch that recording. There's a bit.ly link on the slide there. You can also go to the IPS YouTube channel or on, it's also linked in the History of the Planetarium Working Group page, which is linked in the chat just up a couple of posts. Next slide, please, Pedro. We're also getting things ready for our next webinar, which we hope to have information on very, very shortly. And the theme there is preserving and displaying historic planetarium projectors. As we all know, for the first several decades of our field, the planetarium projector itself was an instrument, an artifice, an object of wonder and attention. And a number of planetariums around the globe, from Moscow, Tokyo, various places in Germany, Edmonton, Pittsburgh, have all found ways to put their projector, to display their historic planetarium projectors in a new sort of context, in a new sort of way for their modern and future audiences. And we'll be having a few of those folks join us to talk about the efforts at their institutions to display and contextualize their historic projectors. Information, dates, times, things like that to come shortly. So stay tuned for more information on that. But it'll be fantastic, and you're definitely going to want to watch. So that's the previous webinar, the next webinar, and then we will obviously, as Pedro said earlier, be looking to keep these as a sort of regular, ongoing series of events to continue sharing more worldwide about the history of our field.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm sure this will be an absolutely great webinar. I hope to see many of you there. And one of the reasons we are really eager to host this webinar is because the machine you see on the screen right now, which was the Avalos first projector, you might know, well, if you watch the video of the first webinar, you'll see Mike telling the story of how after decades, we actually got our machine back, our first machine, which had been decommissioned in the late 1960s, then went through several hands and places. And now it's back with us, and we want to put it on display, but we also want to make sure that we tell a good and compelling and engaging story around it. It's not just having the thing, but how do you tell a good story? So I'm really looking forward to that. And yes, please stay tuned for details. Okay, thank you, Mike. I will move on with the other project, which is a book project. So this is directly connected with the centennial celebrations. And we discussed what kind of initiative could we, as the history of the Planetarium Group, help steer in this context as we celebrate the centennial of the modern planetarium, which of course has deeper roots in the past. So there was an idea in the air that this will be a good occasion to produce a book, but what kind of book should that be? And after much discussion, we ended up landing on the approach of telling the history of something in X objects. I have an example here, if you can see my screen. There's a bit of reflection, but this is a book titled A History, Apollo to the Moon, A History in 50 Objects by Teasel Moore Harmony of the National Air and Space Museum. It's just, it's a rather good example how you can tell a story that is already relatively well known, the story of the Apollo program and the first moon landing. But so here the story is told through a varied array of 50 objects, each of which helps shed light on a very specific aspect of the Apollo program. And importantly, on its social, cultural, political implications, etc. So we decided to follow this approach. And of course, 100 objects, it's the centennial, 100 years, just sounds logical. And one of the things I find especially interesting about a project like this in the realm of, or this, about this concept as applied to the realm of planetaria, is that when we think about the history of planetaria, we tend to think about one object, one type of object, which is the projector, which of course is absolutely central, essential, integral to what planetaria do. But there's more than just projectors. And we thought, well, of course, a book like this will necessarily have to include projectors, and quite a few for sure. But we need to broaden the spectrum of the objects we bring in and the stories we tell, because that hopefully will help us tell a more encompassing story of the planetarium, the history of planetaria, and also their social and cultural impact. And here, there's no limits to the imagination. I just put together this slide with examples of objects that may or may not end up in the book, but there's no limits to the kind of object we can think of. For example, you see Mike's hand there, holding an optical pointer that was used by the early lecturers at the other planetarium. You can tell a story of the human element of the planetarium show, the planetarium demonstration, of kind of the guide, the host, the person who's there guiding the audience through the sky by focusing on this object. You have, for example, a movie poster related to a movie which has a very famous or infamous scene which is set up in a planetarium context. So of course here you can explore the connections between the planetarium and how it was the planetarium itself has been portrayed in popular culture. For example, this very intriguing one, which is a souvenir spoon of the Adler Planetarium. And if you look attentively, you might be able to see that on top of the spoon's handle, there's a figure of there's the Adler building. So I suppose this was a kind of souvenir that started to be sold during the Century of Progress exposition, which was held here in Chicago and in an area that encompassed where the Adler is still located. And so there's something here. I'm sure there's a story here to tell how the planetarium was seen as such a symbol of modernity and scientific progress that it was presented as a big attraction in a major world fair in Chicago, which motto was something like science finds, industry applies, man conforms. So a celebration of science and progress. But then, of course, as I mentioned before, the history of the planetarium didn't start 100 years ago. It started way before. We can trace it back to antiquity. Actually, can trace it back to the extent that we can trace back people using some kind of devices and tools to talk astronomy with each other, try to understand the sky, and try to communicate their knowledge to each other. For example, here, you can see on the right a 19th century magical lantern slide, which would have been used in astronomical lectures. So this will be a direct ancestor of what we think of as the modern planetarium, which, as we have just seen in the previous section, has also evolved into different forms. It's no longer just a building with a dome with a projector sitting there, but the planetarium itself has evolved and has adopted different shapes and forms. Finally, we have a phone card with a planetarium projector in it. What's the story here? I don't know yet, but I want to find out. So this was an object that was pointed out to me by our colleague, Andreas Scholl. And I'm sure there's a lot to be said about why a planetarium projector would be put on a phone card. So these are just a few examples. They may or may not be included in the book, but you see, we want our contributors to use their imagination and help us expand the range of objects with which we can tell a comprehensive history of the planetarium. So let me tell you a few things more about the book project. Our target audience, basically, we want this to be an affordable book to be sold ideally in every planetarium and science museum in the world. So we're aiming here at a general adult audience interested in science and industry, planetarium and science museum visitors, and of course, this will be itself a very diverse audience. And of course, planetary enthusiasts. Obviously, I'm sure that people who already like planetaria will want to read a book like this. So the way we envision the book is basically I'm sorry, something popped up in my screen. So basically there will be an introduction giving an overview of the history of planetarium, and then we'll have 100 vignettes with object stories. We want the stories to be short and focused on one object, but always using that object to tell kind of a broader story and make a broader connection between the planetarium and the society at large. And of course, we want this to be a strongly visual book. We already have a prospective publisher, so negotiations are underway, so I cannot give you more details as of now, but hopefully if things go well, we already have a publisher. Again, we want the book to be affordable, visually appealing, widely distributed. It will be primarily, at least at first, in English. We suppose this is the kind of book that could lend itself to have versions in different languages too, and be sold all over the world. And for now, we have a small group of people who we are calling ourselves volume coordinators. So it's myself, Mike, Katie Boyce-Jacino, and Charlotte Peak. They're both members of the history group as well, and both historians of the planetaria. But again, we are coordinators because we want to coordinate this effort, but we are hoping that we'll be able to count on a diverse group of volunteer contributors. And at some point in due time, we will share more information about how people can contribute and volunteer using the IPS channels. I want to remark that you don't need to be a historian or even a planetarium history buff or whatever, but if you have an object in your institution or that you know about that you think, well, this will be surprising for people and there's a great story here. And if you are willing and available to write up to 500 words and send us, an image that we can use with rights all cleared, etc. And if you want to contribute, we will appreciate very much having contributions from a varied group of people. And now we would like to have your input about a few questions that we still have about this project and about how we can better engage the IPS community with this project. And now I will hand it over again to Mike.
Thanks, Pedro. Just keeping on track of some of the stuff that's already been shared in the comments, some really great suggestions to that point already. So a couple of thoughts we wanted to sort of end with a little bit of a more free-form audience discussions and some back and forth to wrap things up here. The first question Pedro sort of already phrased is, what are some other sorts of objects and stories that we might be able to include in this? Again, thinking about a sort of as wide a net as possible, not just explicitly focusing on, planetarium projectors, but other pieces of hardware, material, ephemera that all help to tell the sort of story of the history of the first 100 years of the planetarium. And then a couple of additional questions here. How can we provide for an overarching narrative that is more diverse, inclusive, and less Western-centric as we do assemble this book? And then sort of a third question of how this book project might be able to connect with other, not only centennial initiatives. We have obviously been in close working closely with the Centennial Group on this to date, but maybe there are other historical and history-related initiatives that we could be a part of as well. So I'm seeing some comments in the chat as well, but feel free if anybody. I think Pedro, maybe we can leave this slide up, because it's a pile of words, but it's important and it'll allow us to keep these questions fresh in our minds. But if anybody would like to share anything, either continuing with the laundry list of items going in the chat now, or just share verbally, feel free. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Mike and Pedro, this is Jim Schweitzer.
Hello, Jim.
I put in the chat, I think the buildings need to be included in the architecture because the Adler, you're sitting in one that's really quite remarkable. And I know from a lot of anecdotal evidence that often we'd like to think people remembered or were attracted by going to see the stars in the dome, but many people are attracted by the architecture. So at some point there needs to be a section or chapter on the architecture and the architects, because they've been extraordinary buildings for the most part.
Absolutely, total agreement. And there have been some great examples. The unique facility in St. Louis is a perfect one too.
Exactly. McDonald's, one of my favorites.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think I can share that there was even an idea in the beginning to do a book specifically focused on planetarium buildings, and I do think that'll be a fantastic book. But it doesn't seem like it seemed just too focused for this specific occasion. But yeah, absolutely, Jim, you're right. Buildings will certainly be part of the set of objects we'll be going to focus on. And Jim or anyone else, if anyone wants to volunteer to write about specific planetarium buildings that you think are really deserve attention, and importantly, that help us again shift the focus to the second question. One concern we have is that the history of planetaria has also always been traditionally Eurocentric, centered on Europe or the United States, and everything that help us kind of extend that focus and provide for a more diverse narrative, we will appreciate those ideas very much.
Yes, I'd like to add the point that we should also pay attention on the seating arrangement, as the first planetariums were concentric, and nowadays a lot of domes are tilted and have this theater stage seating. So there were specific points in history that changed the architecture, which has also a huge influence when we are looking at the visual languages that we are having in Full Dome. So that might also be recognized.
Thank you, Cora. Absolutely. And one of the things that we'll certainly want to address is, I mean, it's everything that helps us understand how the observer is situated in the planetarium. How's the experience? How is the body posture? How is the attendee, the person who participates in the experience, supposed to kind of behave, position their bodies, etc. So yeah, absolutely. I have to say that I don't know if there's any colleague here from the Milan Planetarium in Italy. I went there a few years ago, and it's just an absolutely lovely place. And one of the things that I found the most striking as soon as I got into the planetarium, they had, at the time at least, they had the Zeiss Mark 6, but then the chairs, they had these kind of vintage chairs. And my being used to the modern chairs at the Adler, that I immediately realized, wow, this is really interesting. The way people were seated and kind of the comfort of the experience certainly changed over time. So yeah, absolutely correct. That's a really nice point. I'm sure there will be chairs and other pieces of planetarium furniture involved. And again, this is an appeal to you, Corey, and anyone else who would like to write about that, please get in touch. Although again, we will send out a call for suggestions and proposals for object stories.
There was, since there was the Portable Planetarium Committee report, seems like the development of portable planetariums is a sort of a major development in the planetarium world, considering the number of those that are running around now in the history. One other thing I want to mention about the history would be the types of planetarium shows, that the different types of planetarium shows, because what I've been involved with is mostly audience participation programs. And so that's another kind of development that came about in the history of planetariums.
What kind of, Alan, thank you. Absolutely agree with you about the planetarium, the portable planetaria. And I was just watching this delightful session with the colleagues who spoke before us. And it made me think there's a fascinating link with this idea that the planetarium, before we had the modern projection planetarium, there were portable planetariums of different shapes, like the ORIs, the mechanical models of the solar system that some lecturers would carry around. And again, I showed you that magic lantern slide, same thing. You would carry a slide projector, a magic lantern, and then the slides. And there were these folks who would go, basically they did this for a living. They went from place to place carrying that stuff, and they will go to a theater and set up that show. So this idea of portability is really fascinating. So it precedes the modern planetarium. And now it seems to be so important. And our colleagues made some really fascinating points to how this portable technology can help take the planetarium experience to a more varied audience. So absolutely. I wanted to ask you, Alan, though, since you brought up this idea of audience participation, what kind of objects could we use to address that specific topic? Do you have any ideas?
What kind of objects? Well, there are. That's a tough question. I mean, the first thing comes to mind is manipulatives that are used by people in the audience. You know, like a clipboard. Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the most basic things, a clipboard with a light on it, or a reading lights that shine on the clipboards. Those are essential things. Yeah, objects that the audience would use, like a star clock, for instance, for telling time by the stars.
There was also a program where we use mirrors to simulate the telescope in Hawaii, where the audience members held mirrors. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
There was also an art associated with the construction of dioramas in some of the old style planetariums that was a lost art now, but it was an amazing period in terms of expression of location.
I remember at one of the LIPS meetings, there was somebody who demonstrated shadow puppets.
Yes.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah. In fact, that should be included.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the kinds of archival material we have at the Adler that I find absolutely fascinating was art that was made, basically paintings, and many people here will be familiar with those, you know, kind of older techniques. Paintings that would be made and then photographed, and then I suppose use their slides to be included in shows. And that's really fascinating and kind of reminds you how the planetarium has been this kind of meeting place between art and science. And that's something, the kind of connection that we will want to explore in the book. Mike, I think we have someone with a raised hand.
Yeah, I was going to say, Anna Green, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say two things that we've done to make our planetariums more accessible, those kinds of objects. So for example, the little star plushes that I made, or I know Noreen has created accessible elements for planetariums where she's worked. David Hurd has accessible star wheels, tactile star wheels for the blind. So those could also be interesting and unique objects.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Cora would like to begin again.
Yes, perhaps we can also show one of the first seed button devices to illustrate that we are also interactive in the kind that the audience can interact with the full dome content.
You've got one already, Mike, so.
Yeah, I'm interested in the
tell the story
circa 1999 seat buttons that went into our first Star Rider theater here at the Adler.
Was that something that folks could choose how the show would kind of progress in the next?
Yeah, there were a couple different modes, but they effectively functioned on the audience clicking a sort of color and direction to either manipulate something on the screen, or votes would be aggregated and people would, you know, control which direction the spaceship went, for example.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Let's see, we have plenty. There's a lot going on in the chat, so we'll.
Yeah, Michael, please don't kick me out. I'm going to need a minute to save all this chat at the end of the session. This is great. Thank you all.
I see the Pepsi bottle Aurora projector. That reminds me that there is the IPS special publication called special effects projectors that are, you know, like, what do they call them? The baby food bottle projectors and all kinds of clever things that people did before there were digital projectors. You had to resort to all these weird things to get things to show up on the dome.
The extreme DIY mode of early planetariums.
I do think at some point they should mention Ivan Dreyer and Laserium, which was, something totally different in the dome, and how that contributed to things at the Griffith. He really had a vision.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. So anyone else would like to speak up and point us to some kind of object and story that we are still missing?
One of the things you might want to consider, this is Dave Hostetter, by the way.
Hi, Dave. Nice to see you. One of our great speakers for our first webinar, which is so. Make sure to walk and see Dave talk.
One of the things you might want to think about is expanding the concept a little bit, because a lot of planetariums sponsor star parties, sidewalk astronomy. They may have associated public observatories and things like that. And the real world astronomy outside the dome itself is maybe something that might be mentioned at least in passing too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Dave. That's a great point. And one of the things we want the book to achieve is precisely to show that how the planetarium connects with what's beyond the dome. And this is something I'm personally very interested in. That I've been studying how astronomical observation has been part of the history of the Adler. And in fact, I've been realizing that we could tell the story of the Adler from the perspective of it being a place for observation too, not just the planetarium in the way that we normally understand it, because we always had the amateur telescope making here, the amateur telescope makers. Then there was an optical shop where people could come to and make their own telescopes. There have always been observing sessions and events throughout the history of the planetarium. And importantly, the planetarium was designed so that we have a terrace upstairs. Mm-hmm. And the idea originally was that it will be used as kind of a balcony to put telescopes on, small telescopes, and let people observe. So absolutely, I can easily imagine. But again, when we say the objects can be any telescope mirror, whatever, then that helps us. Kind of the object functions as a point of entry into that story and kind of the illustration of that story. But absolutely,
I think it's an important interaction between planetariums and the general public, and making observing and the view of the night sky, something that people actually start to think about. Because I know when we do it, most of our visitors have never looked through a telescope, or at least not through a good one. And just something as simple as looking at the moon or Saturn sometimes almost seems life-changing to them by their reaction. So I think that's an important part for us to mention.
No, absolutely. The more I study the history of planetary, the more I realize it was never about an artificial sky. It was actually getting people interested in the real one and creating, and in many cases, certainly the Adler, the Griffith as well, of course, because it was the concept of a planetarium / observatory. So the idea of creating opportunities for people to have that experience. And having had an astronomy club myself, Dave, and everyone, and having led so many of those sessions where we show Saturn for people for the first time, and their reaction is always normally something contagious. It's something lovely to see and to watch.
It is.
How much joy you can bring to people just by showing that, the moon or Saturn, etc. Okay, anyone else? And I know this has been already a long day. And wow, this is a vibrant comment section. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, please stay tuned for more details. Okay, I would say, and now to Michael, if there's nothing else for now, at least, yeah, we will hand it over back to you, Michael. Michael's not around. I'm sure he's looking for some really amazing objects to.
We're here.
Here's Michael. All right, Michael.
All right. So with that, I believe we have we can bring our 2021 IPS vCon to a conclusion. Thank you to everyone for attending, for participating, for being actively engaged, and of course to all of our committee chairs, to our committee members. to our board prospects. I mean, there's a lot going on in IPS, and a lot of work still to do, as I think our EDI session may have indicated better than anything else. But what we're planning is to keep this room open for about the next hour and 15 minutes for yet another little hospitality and networking session. And then we should have this today's links up to YouTube sometime a little later this evening, or more than likely what we'll be able to do is send out all of those links to the membership on Monday. So really excited about that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.